The Mafia boss's son was causing chaos in the mansion. Until the Black Maid calmed him with one touch. Inside the grand, marble-lined walls of the mansion, the atmosphere was tense. The house, a sprawling estate nestled on the outskirts of the city, was typically a symbol of wealth and power. But today, it was a battleground. The Mafia boss's son, young and full of anger, was in a rage. His tantrum echoed through the halls, shaking the very foundations of the estate. The marble floors, which gleamed like mirrors, were now littered with broken vases, torn papers, and shattered glass. His temper had no boundaries, and the servants, normally accustomed to his outbursts, were powerless. They stood at the edges of the grand hallway, avoiding his gaze, afraid to get too close. This was not just a rebellious teenager. This was a boy born into a world of fear and authority, a world that demanded perfection but offered no comfort in return. The boy's screams reverberated through the mansion as his father, the feared Mafia boss, was away handling business. Without his father's imposing presence, the mansion's servants felt more like prisoners than employees. Yet, no one dared to approach him. He had always been difficult to handle, and his fits were becoming more frequent. His rage, fueled by the weight of the family legacy he was expected to inherit, was nearly uncontrollable. The walls of the mansion had seen many things, but they had never witnessed a tantrum quite like this. The boy's tantrum grew louder, as though trying to shatter the last remnants of peace within the estate. As the chaos continued, a lone figure walked into the scene, her steps calm, measured, and deliberate. She was the Black Maid, quiet and unassuming, often overlooked by the others. She had spent years in this mansion, cleaning its towering halls, dusting its expensive furniture, and cooking for its elite residents. But today was different. She had been watching the young boy from a distance, noticing the way his emotions spiraled out of control, and she felt a deep sympathy for him. She knew what it was like to feel trapped, to be burdened with expectations that no one could understand. She had learned to keep her distance, to stay in the background, but today something within her shifted. As the boy raged, throwing things across the room. In a violent frenzy, she knew that now was the time. Without a word, she stepped forward, her movements deliberate and slow, each step calculated. The servants watched in disbelief. She approached the boy, whose anger had reached its peak, and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, everything changed. The boy paused, the anger in his eyes faltering. His breathing slowed as he looked up at her, a mixture of confusion and something else, perhaps relief. For the first time, he stopped fighting the emotions that had consumed him. The Black Maid, with nothing more than a single touch, had managed to calm the storm inside him. The servants, once frozen in place, now exchanged glances. They had never seen the boy this way before. The boy, the one who had always been seen as nothing more than a spoiled heir, was now quiet, his emotions finally at peace. The maid had done something none of them could, and in that quiet moment, the mansion felt different. The chaos had subsided, and a new kind of tension hung in the air, one of curiosity and wonder. After the storm of chaos had settled, a heavy silence filled the mansion. The once loud and unruly cries of the Mafia boss's son had faded, replaced by an uneasy calm. The boy, who had been on the verge of completely losing control just moments ago, now stood motionless, his back to the corner of the grand hall. His eyes were wide, his breath shallow, still processing the sudden shift in his emotions. The Black Maid, whose calm presence had been the only thing to break the tension, remained by his side. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her touch had already said enough. Slowly, the boy turned his head, his gaze falling on her. There was no anger in his eyes now, only confusion and a hint of gratitude. He had never experienced anything like this before. No one had ever approached him during his fits of rage with such care. Everyone else had always been too afraid or too hesitant. The boy wasn't sure what to make of the woman who had stepped into his emotional storm, but something inside him stirred. It wasn't the fear he'd grown so accustomed to, nor the defiance he'd shown his entire life. Instead, there was a sense of relief, something he hadn't realized he'd been craving. The maid stood still, her eyes focused on him, her body relaxed, as though she were waiting for him to speak first. After what felt like an eternity, the boy finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you touch me?" he asked, his words tinged with a mixture of uncertainty and wonder. The maid looked down at him, her expression softening. "You were hurting," she said simply, her voice calm and steady. "You don't have to fight your pain alone." Her words, though simple, struck something deep within him. He had been raised to bury his feelings, to suppress his weaknesses, to be the strong heir to the Mafia empire. But here she was, a maid, someone who was expected to be invisible in the grand scheme of things, offering him something he had never been given: understanding. The boy's eyes flickered, a storm of emotions swirling within him. He wanted to lash out, to push her away, to resist the vulnerability she was making him feel. But for some reason, he couldn't. The moment he had been so desperate to control was slipping through his fingers, and yet, he didn't want to fight it anymore. His usual response to these overwhelming feelings would have been to strike out, to run away, to escape into the chaos. But there was something about her presence that made him want to stay. The boy took a deep breath, feeling a weight he hadn't noticed before lift off his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could breathe. The black maid's steady gaze never wavered, never judged. She wasn't looking at him as the son of the Mafia boss, the heir to the family fortune. She was looking at him as a person. This simple act of kindness, this quiet empathy, was something he had never experienced before. As the silence stretched between them, the boy found himself unsure of what to say next. He had never been taught how to deal with his emotions in a healthy way. All his life, he had been told to hide them, to bury them deep inside, to present a mask of strength and control. But here, in this moment, he felt something stir inside him, something he had buried for years. For the first time, he didn't feel like he had to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't have to be perfect. The boy swallowed hard, his voice still shaky. "I don't know how to," he trailed off, unsure of what he was trying to say. The maid nodded, her expression kind but firm. "You don't have to know how," she said gently. "You just have to let yourself feel." Her words were simple, but they carried a truth that resonated deep within him. It wasn't a lesson he had learned from his family or anyone else in his life. But now, standing in front of this woman who had shown him nothing but patience and kindness, he realized that there was more to life than power, control, and dominance. There was healing, there was understanding, and there was peace. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of his emotions begin to shift, like a heavy storm cloud starting to break apart. The boy didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was alone. And as he looked at the black maid, he found himself wishing that he could learn to be more like her, calm, steady, and full of grace. After the boy had calmed down, the mansion fell back into an uneasy silence. The black maid, still standing beside him, noticed the subtle change in the air. The storm of chaos had passed, but the boy's internal turmoil was far from over. He was no longer throwing things or screaming, but she knew that did not mean he had found peace. She could sense his deep frustration, his confusion, and most of all, his yearning for something more than just a cold existence in this vast, empty mansion. The boy stood there for a moment, his back still facing the maid, staring out of the large windows that overlooked the sprawling estate. His mind was racing. He had always been taught to hide his feelings, to never show weakness. His father, the Mafia boss, had raised him to be strong, unshakable, and in control. But the moment he had shared with the maid had cracked something open inside him. For the first time, he had felt vulnerable, and that vulnerability scared him. The maid, however, was not intimidated by his silence. She stood patiently, waiting for him to speak, knowing that he needed time to process the emotions he had never been allowed to express. Her quiet presence was a comfort, something that he hadn't realized he needed until now. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the boy turned around. His face was still filled with uncertainty, but there was something different in his eyes. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you calm me down like that?" The maid looked at him with gentle eyes, her expression kind but firm. "Because you needed it," she replied softly. "No one should have to go through life carrying all that anger and pain alone." The boy frowned, still not fully understanding. "But you don't know me. You don't know what it's like." The maid nodded, understanding his hesitation. "I don't need to know everything about you to know that you're hurting," she said. I've seen enough in my life to recognize when someone needs help." The boy looked away, staring out the window again, as if searching for something outside to distract him. But there was no escaping the truth of her words. For years, he had been trapped in a cage of expectations, of power, of fear. He had never known a world where he could be free to feel, to express himself without fear of judgment or punishment. The idea of being vulnerable was foreign to him. Yet in that brief moment of connection with the maid, he had felt something he couldn't name, something that both frightened and comforted him. "I don't know how to be like you," he admitted, his voice filled with a mix of frustration and confusion. "I don't know how to just let it go." The maid stepped closer to him, her gaze never leaving his. "You don't have to know everything all at once," she said. "It's a process. It's okay to take small steps." The boy looked at her, his eyes searching for any sign of doubt, but there was none. She wasn't like the others who had tried to control him, to mold him into something he wasn't. She was offering him something different, something real. For the first time, he felt the possibility of change, but it was still hard to believe. How could he, the son of the most powerful mafia boss in the city, allow himself to change? How could he let go of the anger that had been his shield for so long? "You don't have to be perfect," the maid continued. "You don't have to live up to anyone's expectations but your own." The boy felt a tight knot in his chest loosen slightly. He didn't know if he was ready to change, but for the first time, he wanted to try. The maid's words had planted a seed in him, one that he wasn't sure he could fully nurture yet, but it was there, deep down, in a place he had long ignored. As the boy stood in front of her, something shifted within him. The walls he had built up around his heart had begun to crack, and for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find peace. He didn't have all the answers, and he certainly didn't know what the future would hold. But in this moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, the possibility of a new beginning. The maid gave him a small smile, her eyes warm with understanding. "You don't have to do it alone," she said softly. And in that moment, the boy knew she was right. For the first time, he didn't feel alone in his pain. And perhaps, just perhaps, he was ready to begin the journey of healing. The boy's internal battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The maid's calming touch had momentarily broken through the fortress he had built around his heart, but it didn't erase years of emotional scars. The mansion was still a gilded cage, its walls echoing with the weight of his family's expectations. But for the first time, he didn't feel completely suffocated. The boy began to notice small changes in himself, subtle shifts that confused him. After the maid had left him alone, he found himself wandering the mansion, unable to focus. His mind was drifting back to that moment with her, when the anger had melted away, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. It was a feeling he had never truly allowed himself to experience. He had been raised to suppress emotions, to be strong, unyielding, and unshakable, just like his father, the mafia boss. But the more he thought about that moment, the more he realized that the walls he had built around his heart were only holding him back. He didn't want to be like his father, cold and ruthless. He wanted something more than that. But as much as he wanted to change, he still didn't know how. His life had always been dictated by his father's rules and the harsh lessons that came with being part of a powerful, dangerous family. Emotions were a weakness in his world, and kindness was often seen as a liability. The boy sat by a grand window, looking out over the mansion's vast grounds. The sprawling gardens, the large fountains, the towering trees, they all seemed so distant now. They had once been symbols of wealth and privilege, but now they felt empty, like a backdrop to his loneliness. He felt like a prisoner, even in his own home. But the memory of the maid's gentle touch kept creeping into his thoughts. She had offered him something different, empathy, understanding, and, most of all, a kind of kindness he had never known. She had not asked for anything in return. She had simply been there, offering him comfort when no one else would dare. The boy didn't know what to make of it. He had been raised to believe that showing emotion made him weak, but in that brief moment of connection, he had felt a strange sense of strength. Maybe kindness wasn't the weakness he had always thought it was. Maybe it was the very thing that could make him stronger. As the boy sat there, lost in thought, he heard footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The maid had returned. She wasn't carrying a tray of food or sweeping the floors like she usually did. This time, She was simply standing there, quietly observing him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, not awkward. It was as though the space they shared had shifted, becoming a place of understanding rather than tension. Finally, the boy turned to face her. "Why do you keep coming back?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The maid met his gaze, her expression soft but unwavering. "Because you're worth it," she said simply. "You deserve to be heard, to be seen, to be cared for, even if no one else in this house understands that." The boy swallowed hard, feeling something stir inside him. It was a strange feeling, one he couldn't quite name, but it was there, growing inside him, like a spark waiting to catch fire. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. Not his father, not the people who worked for him, and certainly not the others who treated him like a prince, only when it suited them. But the maid, she didn't want anything from him. She wasn't afraid of him, nor did she see him as just another heir to a criminal empire. She saw him as a person, a young man who had been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders for far too long. The boy felt his chest tighten. For the first time in his life, he felt like he could let go of the mask he had been wearing, the mask of strength and control. But doing that would mean facing the truth about who he really was, and the truth terrified him. "I don't know if I can," he confessed, his voice cracking. "I don't know how to be different, how to let go of everything I've been taught." The maid stepped closer, her presence steady and reassuring. "It's not about being perfect," she said, her voice calm. "It's about taking small steps. You don't have to change overnight, but you have to start somewhere." The boy looked at her, uncertainty still clouding his thoughts. He wasn't sure if he was ready to let go of the walls he had built, but something in her words stirred something deep within him. Maybe, just maybe, he could start taking those small steps. Maybe he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders forever. He took a deep breath, letting the air fill his lungs, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, and he would undoubtedly face challenges along the way. But for the first time, he felt like it was possible. The walls he had built around his heart were still there, but they felt a little less suffocating. And perhaps, with time, he could learn to tear them down, for good. Days passed after the boy's moment of change, and though things were quieter, the boy still found himself lost in his own mind. The mansion, once a place of dominance and control, now felt like a prison, its cold, grand halls echoing with the weight of expectations. The moment of clarity he had felt with the maid still lingered, but each day was another struggle to navigate the path she had gently shown him. His father, the Mafia Boss, had returned from his business trip, and with his return, the weight of authority in the mansion returned as well. The boy had grown accustomed to his father's cold presence, the way he controlled every situation with just a glance, the way his power radiated through the mansion's walls. But today, as he watched his father settle into his usual place at the head of the dining table, something inside the boy shifted. He no longer felt the same fear he once had. The anger that had boiled inside him for so long seemed distant, replaced by a quiet yearning to break free from the mold his father had crafted for him. "You're quiet today," his father said, his voice low and sharp as he eyed his son across the table. "Something on your mind?" The boy hesitated. His father's gaze was cold, calculating, as if he were expecting the boy to answer with some grand declaration. But all the boy could think about was the maid. How her simple touch had calmed the storm inside him. How her words had opened his eyes to a world where he didn't have to be perfect, where he could be something other than his father's successor. He felt trapped, as if he were caught between two worlds. The one he had been born into, full of power, ruthlessness, and expectations, and the one he longed for, full of compassion, kindness, and emotional freedom. "I'm fine," the boy replied, his voice quieter than he intended. His father studied him for a moment, and the boy knew that his father saw through his mask. The Mafia Boss had always been able to read people with ease, and the boy was no exception. But the boy refused to give in. He had made up his mind. The boy had always been his father's heir, the one groomed to take over the family empire, but now, he felt different. The power, the wealth, the control, it all seemed so empty. He didn't want to be just a figurehead, a puppet in his father's world. He wanted more. And yet, he wasn't sure how to start. How could he even begin to walk away from everything he had known? The boy's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. The maid appeared at the door, her presence as calm and steady as ever. She didn't look at the boy directly, but he could feel her gaze on him, a silent reassurance that he wasn't alone. She had shown him a glimpse of something he had never considered before: kindness. The kind of kindness that didn't come with strings attached, the kind that didn't demand anything in return. The boy's heart fluttered for a moment, but he quickly pushed the feeling aside. This was not the time for such emotions. He had to focus. He had to be strong. But as his father spoke again, the boy realized that nothing could ever be the same. "You're not living up to your potential," his father said coldly, his eyes narrowing. "You were born for more than this. Don't forget your place." The words stung, but the boy didn't flinch. He had spent his entire life living in fear of his father's disapproval, constantly striving to meet his impossible expectations. But now, for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity. He didn't have to follow the same path his father had carved out for him. He didn't have to live in the shadows of a man who only saw power, control, and dominance as the ultimate goals in life. The boy stood up from the table, surprising his father. "I'm not going to be what you want me to be," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I'm not going to follow in your footsteps." His father's eyes widened in disbelief. The boy had never spoken like this before. The Mafia Boss stared at him, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed as though time had stopped. The boy's heart raced, but he didn't back down. "I don't need to be like you," the boy continued, his voice stronger now. "I need to find my own way." His father's face twisted in anger, his lips curling into a sneer. "You're making a mistake," he spat. "You're nothing without me. Nothing without this family." The boy's resolve only hardened. He had made up his mind. He didn't want to be nothing anymore. He didn't want to live in the shadow of a man who never saw him. As more than an heir to a throne, he wanted to be seen for who he truly was. The boy turned and walked toward the door, his steps echoing through the cold, empty mansion. His father's voice called after him, but he didn't turn back. As the boy stepped into the hallway, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in his life, he was free. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to find out. And as he walked down the grand hallway, he could feel the maid's presence beside him, guiding him, silently reassuring him that he was not alone. He didn't need to be his father's son anymore. He was ready to be his own person. After the boy left the dinner table, his mind was in a whirlwind. He had stood up to his father, but the weight of that moment hung over him like a storm cloud. As he walked through the grand halls of the mansion, he felt a strange mixture of fear and liberation. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and control, now felt like a maze, full of corridors and rooms that he no longer wanted to be a part of. He had spent his whole life trapped within its walls, its power and coldness pressing in on him from all sides. But now, for the first time, he felt the possibility of freedom, even if it was a terrifying thought. His father's voice still echoed in his mind, demanding that he follow in his footsteps, that he become the perfect heir to the Mafia empire. But the boy couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't live his life to fulfill someone else's vision. The last few days had been a whirlwind of emotions, from the chaos of his outburst to the unexpected calm brought by the maid's touch. She had shown him a kindness he had never known, and that moment of vulnerability had sparked something inside him. But now, standing in the vast emptiness of the mansion, he felt lost. He didn't know where to go next, or what to do with his newfound sense of freedom. He had always known what was expected of him: to inherit the family's power, to rule with an iron fist, to continue the legacy of fear and dominance. But what did he want? What did he truly need? His thoughts were interrupted as he passed a familiar door, his father's study. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear the sound of papers shuffling, the rustle of someone deep in thought. The boy hesitated. His father was in there, no doubt planning his next move, no doubt already plotting how to bring him back into the fold. But the boy had made his decision. He couldn't go back to the way things were. He couldn't be the person his father wanted him to be. With a deep breath, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. His father looked up, his dark eyes narrowing as he saw his son standing in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the weight of unspoken words. "You shouldn't be here," his father finally said, his voice cold and firm. The boy didn't flinch. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice steady but uncertain. His father's gaze softened for just a moment, then hardened again. About what? The boy swallowed, gathering his thoughts. I'm not going to be what you want me to be, he said, his words slow but deliberate. I'm not going to take over the family business. I'm not going to be the heir you wanted. His father's expression darkened, his lips curling into a sneer. You don't understand, he spat. This is your legacy. This is who you are. You can't just walk away from it. The boy shook his head. I'm not walking away, he said quietly. I'm choosing my own path. I'm choosing who I want to be, not who you tell me to be. The silence between them grew thick, like a weight pressing down on both of them. The Mafia boss's gaze never wavered, but the boy could see the flicker of something in his eyes, something close to regret, something close to fear. You'll regret this, his father said, his voice low. You'll see. You'll come crawling back when you realize how empty the world is without power. The boy felt a pang of doubt, but he pushed it away. This was the moment he had been building up to. He couldn't let his father's words sway him. He had to follow his own heart, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. I'm not going to regret it, the boy said, his voice stronger now. I'm going to find my own way. His father stood up from behind the desk, his tall frame casting a shadow over the boy. For a moment, it seemed like he might reach out, might try to grab him, to pull him back into the world of power and fear. But instead, he just looked at him, his face hardening into a mask of cold indifference. Then you are no longer my son, his father said, his voice final. The boy's heart sank, but he didn't let the words break him. This was the price he had to pay for choosing his own path. He turned and walked out of the room, his father's cold words still ringing in his ears. As he left the study, he felt a sense of finality wash over him. He had made his decision, and there was no going back. The mansion, once a prison, now felt like a place he was ready to leave behind. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he felt free. The maid's kindness had shown him the possibility of a different life, one where he could be himself, without the chains of expectation. And now, it was time to take that first step into the unknown. The boy's life had been turned upside down, and as he walked through the grand halls of the mansion, it felt like he was walking through a dream, one he had never imagined for himself. The weight of his father's words still hung heavily in his mind, but there was something in his chest that made him stand taller, even if just for a moment. He had chosen to leave the legacy his father had carved for him behind, but now, he faced an unknown future. As he left the study, the mansion seemed more foreign to him than ever. The once comforting, cold stone walls now seemed suffocating. The polished floors, the towering ceilings, all of it felt more like a gilded cage than the luxurious home it had been for most of his life. But as he stepped outside, the warm air greeted him, a reminder that he was free from his father's world. His heart was pounding in his chest, and every step forward felt like a small victory. He didn't know where he was going yet, but the idea of walking away, of carving his own path, was something that filled him with a strange sense of relief. But there was still doubt, still fear. What would the world outside this mansion be like? Could he really live a life that was his own, without the safety net of his father's power and wealth? As he wandered the grounds of the estate, his thoughts turned to the maid. Her presence had been a quiet anchor for him, a symbol of kindness and hope in a life that had been defined by control and coldness. She had shown him that it was possible to live a life without the constant pressure of perfection. She had given him something he had never experienced before, unconditional understanding. He wondered where she was now. Would she still be there for him? Would she understand his decision? He had a million questions swirling in his mind, but one thing was clear. He couldn't stay in the mansion. He had to find his own way. As he reached the edge of the grounds, he saw her standing by the gate. The maid. She looked as calm and composed as ever, but her eyes met his with a quiet understanding. She didn't need to ask him what had happened. She already knew. He walked toward her, his steps slow but determined. I did it, he said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. I told him. I told my father I'm not going to follow in his footsteps. The maid didn't speak right away. She simply nodded, as though she had known all along that he would find the courage. And now, she asked softly, her gaze steady. Now, the boy's voice trailed off as he looked out at the vast estate behind him. Now, I'm not sure what to do. There was a pause before the maid spoke again. You don't have to know everything right away. It's okay to take it one step at a time. What matters is that you're choosing for yourself. The boy looked at her, her words settling in his heart like a bomb. She was right. He didn't need to have it all figured out. For once, he could allow himself the space to grow, to make mistakes, and to live on his own terms. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be challenges. There always were. But for the first time, he felt ready. He had a chance to build his own life, away from the expectations that had always weighed him down. "I don't know what comes next," he said, his voice steady now. "But I'm ready to find out." The maid smiled, a warmth in her eyes that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this journey. "That's all anyone can do," she replied. "Take it one day at a time." The boy looked at her, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over him. He had walked away from everything he knew, from the life that had been carved out for him. It was a terrifying thought, but also one that felt like freedom. For the first time in his life, he wasn't defined by the weight of his family's legacy. He was defining himself. And that, he realized, was worth more than any power or wealth. With the maid by his side, he felt ready to take the next step into a future that was entirely his own. He didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time, he felt hopeful. For the first time, he felt free. The boy's first step into the unknown felt both exhilarating and terrifying. As he walked further away from the mansion, with its towering walls and cold, oppressive atmosphere, he couldn't help but glance back. It had been his whole world for as long as he could remember, and the idea of leaving it behind was not something he had ever imagined. But now, there was no turning back. His father's words still echoed in his mind, the harsh rejection ringing in his ears. "You are no longer my son." That sentence stung, but at the same time, it was a release. He had spent so long trying to earn his father's approval, trying to live up to impossible expectations. But now, for the first time, he was free. Free from the legacy that had been forced upon him. Free from the world of power, manipulation, and fear. The boy didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he had to make his own choices. With each step, he felt the weight of his family's empire slipping further away, and the possibility of creating a new life, one where he wasn't defined by his name, began to take shape. He wasn't sure where to go or what to do, but he knew he couldn't stay in the shadow of his father's mansion. He had to find his own path. As he walked, the boy thought about the maid. Her calm presence, her kind words, and her quiet strength had been a lifeline to him. He had never experienced anything like it before. She had shown him that there was another way to live, a way that didn't involve constantly battling for power or hiding behind a mask of control. He had tried to ignore the feelings she had stirred in him, but now, as he walked away from everything he knew, he couldn't deny that she had changed something inside him. Her words, "You deserve to be heard," replayed in his mind. He had spent so long believing that his worth was tied to his family's power, but she had shown him a different kind of strength, one rooted in compassion, empathy, and understanding. He wasn't sure if he was ready to open up to her yet, but he knew that somehow, she had become a symbol of the life he wanted to build. As the boy continued on, he felt the pull of his past still tugging at him. He thought of the mansion, the people who had worked there, the life he had left behind. He thought of his father, the man who had molded him into someone he didn't recognize, and felt a surge of anger rise within him. But it wasn't the kind of anger that had consumed him before. It was a quiet, controlled anger, one that came from the realization that he had been living a life that wasn't his. He had allowed his father to define him, to control him, and now, he was taking that power back. The boy had no idea where he would go next. He didn't have any grand plans or a clear idea of what his future held, but for the first time, he felt a sense of direction. He was no longer at the mercy of his father's expectations. He was free to decide for himself. And in that moment, the boy made a decision. He would go back to the maid. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew that she had given him something that no one else had ever offered: hope. Hope for a future where he wasn't bound by the chains of his past. He turned around and began to walk back toward the mansion. His footsteps were slow but steady, the weight of his decision settling into him with every step. As he approached the gate, he saw her standing there, just as calm and steady as before. She didn't say anything when she saw him, but there was a softness in her eyes, a silent understanding that he had come to a decision. "I'm ready," the boy said quietly, standing a few feet from her. "I don't know where this is going, but I know I can't do it alone." The maid nodded, her expression warm but firm. You don't have to do it alone, she said softly. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be willing to take the first step. The boy felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time, he wasn't carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need to. He had taken the first step, and that was enough. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The maid smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile. You've already started the hardest part, she said. Now, we take it one step at a time. And with that, the boy felt a new sense of peace settle in his chest. For the first time, he didn't feel lost. He didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but he knew that he wasn't alone. He had someone who understood him, someone who believed in him. And with that, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The boy's journey had just begun, and though the path ahead was unclear, something within him had already started to change. He walked away from the mansion not with the fear that had once haunted him, but with a sense of resolve. As he walked beside the maid, who had become his silent guide, he could feel the weight of his past slowly lifting. The mansion that had once felt like a suffocating cage now seemed distant. His father's rejection still stung, but it was no longer the defining force in his life. With every step, the boy realized he was not just walking away from the mansion, but from everything that had been imposed upon him. For the first time, he was choosing his own direction. The maid walked with him, her presence calm and reassuring. She didn't ask him to explain himself, didn't demand anything from him. She simply walked beside him, offering a quiet strength that he had never known. It was as though, for the first time in his life, he didn't have to hide or pretend. With her, he didn't have to be the heir to a powerful family. He could just be himself. They walked through the streets, passing by people who were unaware of the significance of the boy's decision. To the world, he was just another young man, walking through the city, but to him, each step felt like breaking free from the chains of his past. The boy didn't know where they were going, and for once, he didn't care. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was simply looking for a place where he could breathe, where he could be free of the expectations that had defined him for so long. As they walked, the boy found himself thinking about his father. He had spent so much of his life trying to live up to that man's image. His father's power had been all-consuming, his legacy something the boy had been expected to continue without question. But now, the boy was questioning everything. What did power really mean? What was the point of controlling others if you could never control yourself? These thoughts swirled in his mind as he walked, and with each question, he felt the knot in his chest loosen just a little more. The maid noticed his quiet contemplation and spoke softly, breaking the silence. It's okay to feel lost, she said, her voice gentle. You don't have to have all the answers right now. It's okay to take your time. The boy glanced at her, surprised by her words. He had been so focused on finding his place, on figuring out what came next, that he had forgotten to just exist, to breathe. I don't even know where I'm going, he admitted, his voice filled with uncertainty. I don't know what to do next. The maid smiled softly. That's okay, she said. The first step is always the hardest. The rest will come when you're ready. The boy nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. For the first time, he wasn't consumed by the need to have everything figured out. He didn't have to have all the answers. All he needed was to take one step at a time, and the rest would follow. As they continued their walk, the boy realized something he hadn't fully understood before. Freedom wasn't about escaping from his father or his past. It was about allowing himself to make his own choices, to live without the weight of others' expectations. It was about finding peace within himself. They stopped at a small cafe on a quiet corner of the city, the maid suggesting they take a break. The boy hesitated for a moment, but then he nodded. Sitting there, in the quiet corner of a bustling city, he felt a sense of peace he had never known. He wasn't sure where his future was leading him, but in this moment, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. He wasn't just the son of a mafia boss. He was someone with the power to choose his own life. As the boy sat there, looking out at the busy street, he felt the first real sense of freedom he had ever known. He didn't have to be anyone other than who he was. And for the first time in his life, that felt enough. He smiled softly, a small but genuine smile, and looked at the maid beside him. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. The maid looked at him, her eyes soft with understanding. You did it, she said. You made the hardest choice. The rest is just living. The boy nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in his heart. As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave, he knew that his journey was far from over. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. He was ready to face whatever came next, because now, he was walking his own path. And that, he realized, was all he needed to start living a life that was truly his own. The boy had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but the sense of freedom he felt today made it easier to let go of the past. He stood at the edge of the city, the sounds of life bustling around him, the future stretching out before him like an open road. But as he stood there, he realized something. He wasn't walking alone anymore. The maid, the woman who had shown him kindness when he was at his lowest, was standing beside him. She hadn't just offered him a way out of the mansion. She had given him something much more precious, a chance to live authentically, to be free of the chains that had bound him for so long. The city felt different to him now. It wasn't a place of fear or power. It was a place where he could start over, where he could breathe without the weight of expectations pressing down on him. He had spent so many years trying to become what his father wanted, but now, for the first time, he was free to be who he truly was. As they walked through the streets, the boy noticed how different everything seemed. People went about their day, not noticing the former mafia heir walking among them. To them, he was just another young man, but to him, that anonymity felt like liberation. "Where do we go now?" he asked the maid, his voice still uncertain but hopeful. "Wherever you want to go," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "The world is yours now." The boy smiled softly. He had never felt this way before, like the world was wide open, like he could take control of his own destiny. It was a strange, yet comforting feeling. He didn't need to have it all figured out, and for once, that didn't scare him. The idea of living without a plan was unfamiliar to him, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was his chance to carve out a life of his own. The boy and the maid continued to walk, passing through neighborhoods he had never explored. The boy had always been sheltered, confined to the mansion and the world his father had built for him. But now, he saw the city in a new light. It was full of possibilities, full of people just living their lives, making choices, and following their own paths. "What if I don't know where to start?" the boy asked, his voice filled with doubt. "What if I make a mistake?" The maid turned to him, her expression gentle. "You will make mistakes. Everyone does," she said softly. "But that's part of living. It's about learning, growing, and finding your own way. The important thing is that you're doing it for yourself." The boy nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He didn't need to have all the answers right now. What mattered was that he had taken the first step, and he was ready to keep moving forward. They continued walking, the streets of the city now feeling less foreign and more like a place where he could belong. After what felt like hours, they stopped at a small park. The boy sat down on one of the benches, looking up at the sky, which was beginning to turn a deep shade of orange as the sun began to set. The day had been full of emotions, and now, as he sat in the quiet of the park, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. "What happens now?" the boy asked, looking at the maid beside him. "Now you live," she said simply. "You take each day as it comes, and you make the most of it. You find what makes you happy, and you follow it." The boy stared ahead, feeling a weight lift from his chest. For the first time, he didn't feel the pressure to be anyone other than who he was. He could finally live for himself, not for anyone else's expectations. "I never thought I'd be here," the boy admitted, his voice quiet. "I never thought I'd leave the mansion. But now that I'm here, it feels right." The maid smiled, her eyes full of understanding. "You've already made the hardest choice," she said. "Now, all that's left is to live." The boy smiled back, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid to find out. He wasn't bound by his past, and he wasn't controlled by his father's legacy. He was free. And as he sat there, watching the sunset, he realized that freedom wasn't just about leaving the mansion. It was about choosing to live on his own terms, to follow his own heart. And with that, the boy took a deep breath, ready to step into the unknown, knowing that no matter what came next, he would face it as himself. The boy's journey had already been filled with uncertainty and change, but now, as he sat in the park, he realized that the hardest part was just beginning. The weight of his family's expectations still lingered in his thoughts, and as he looked around at the people passing by, He couldn't help but wonder if he was truly ready for what lay ahead. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden hue over everything. It felt like a new beginning, yet the boy couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had left the mansion, left behind his father's legacy, but what did that truly mean? What did it mean to be free when you had never been free before? He looked to the maid, who had been quietly sitting beside him, offering no judgment, just her presence. For the first time, the boy realized how much her support had meant to him. She had never asked anything from him. She had never pushed him to make any decision. She simply let him be. And now, as he sat there beside her, he knew he couldn't turn back. I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something, the boy said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. But I don't know what it is. The maid glanced at him, her eyes soft but knowing. It's normal to feel that way, she said calmly. You've just taken a huge step. You don't need to have everything figured out right now. The boy sighed, leaning back against the bench. I always thought I knew what my life would be like. It was all planned out for me. He paused, thinking back to the mansion, to his father's cold expectations. Now, it feels like I'm walking in the dark, and I don't know if I can do it alone. The maid smiled gently, offering him a quiet reassurance. You're not alone, she said. You never were. The boy looked at her, surprised by the certainty in her voice. He had spent his entire life feeling isolated, like no one really understood him. But now, with her by his side, he realized that perhaps he wasn't as alone as he had thought. The road ahead was uncertain, yes, but at least he had someone who believed in him. I've spent so much of my life being someone I'm not, the boy admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know who I really am anymore. The maid's gaze softened. You don't have to know everything all at once, she said. You'll discover who you are in your own time. It's not about having all the answers. It's about allowing yourself to live, to make mistakes, and to learn. The boy nodded slowly, her words sinking in. For the first time, he felt like he didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to have all the answers. He just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. As they sat there in the fading light, the boy felt a sense of clarity begin to form in his mind. The world was big, full of endless possibilities, and he was finally ready to embrace them. He didn't have to follow in his father's footsteps. He didn't have to carry the weight of an empire on his shoulders. He was free to make his own choices. I don't know what I'm going to do next, the boy said, his voice steady now. But I know I want to live for myself. I want to find out who I really am. The maid gave him a small, encouraging smile. That's all you need, she said. And the rest will come when you're ready. The boy stood up, feeling a new sense of determination rising within him. He didn't know where his journey would lead, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. He was ready to take the next step, whatever it might be. As he looked at the maid, he realized that, in a way, she had shown him the way. She had given him the courage to leave behind everything he had known and walk toward the unknown. And now, he was ready to walk that path on his own. Thank you, the boy said, his voice thick with gratitude. You've helped me more than you know. The maid nodded, her eyes warm. You've always had the strength within you, she said. You just had to see it for yourself. The boy smiled, the weight of his past no longer holding him back. For the first time, he felt like he was in control of his own life. The road ahead was uncertain, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he was ready to face it, ready to walk his own path. With one last look at the park and the city beyond, he turned and walked forward, not knowing what the future held but certain of one thing. He was finally free. As the boy walked further into the unknown, the weight of his decision still settled in his chest like a storm cloud, yet there was an undeniable sense of freedom that began to take root within him. Each step he took felt like an affirmation of his choice. He had left behind everything he once knew, his father's powerful world, the mansion that had been his prison, and the legacy that had always threatened to define him. The city felt alive in a way he hadn't experienced before. Its hustle and bustle were new to him, but somehow, they felt welcoming. He wasn't walking among the shadows of a legacy anymore. He was walking in the light, no longer chained to expectations. The maid walked beside him, her presence a constant reminder of the simple kindness that had been his first taste of freedom. They didn't speak much, yet the silence between them was comfortable, a quiet understanding that they didn't need to say anything to know what the other was thinking. But the boy couldn't shake the feeling that he was still a little lost. What now? What did the future hold for someone like him, a young man who had turned his back on everything he was supposed to become? As the sun began to set, casting a soft glow over the city, the boy stopped and looked around. For the first time, he wasn't looking for a way out. He was looking for a way in, a way to step into a world that wasn't defined by his father's shadow. "I never thought I'd be here," the boy said softly, his voice laced with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. "I never thought I'd walk away from it all. From the mansion, from my father." The maid glanced at him, her expression unreadable, yet there was warmth in her eyes. "You've taken the hardest step," she said, her voice steady, as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "It's the first step that counts, no matter how unsure you are. The rest will follow." The boy nodded slowly, her words soothing the lingering doubts in his mind. It felt strange, being free like this, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized it was all he had ever wanted. He had spent so many years living under the weight of expectations, trying to be someone he wasn't, and now, for the first time, he was free to explore the person he could be. He didn't have to follow in his father's footsteps. He didn't have to be the heir to a criminal empire. He could be more than that. And yet, despite the excitement that came with freedom, there was still a gnawing fear inside him. He didn't know where to begin. What kind of life could he build now? "What do I do now?" he asked, the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I have no plan, no idea where to go from here." The maid smiled gently, her eyes filled with understanding. "You don't need to have all the answers right away," she said. "You're not supposed to know everything. What matters is that you're making your own choices now, not living to meet someone else's expectations." The boy looked at her, feeling a sense of relief. Her words were simple, but they made something inside him shift. For so long, he had been defined by what others wanted him to be. Now, he was free to define himself, to make choices for himself, no matter how small or big. The boy glanced around at the city again, his heart beating a little faster. He didn't know where to go, but for the first time, he didn't feel afraid to step forward. "I guess I don't need to have it all figured out," he said, his voice gaining a bit more confidence. "I just need to start somewhere." The maid nodded, her smile softening. "Exactly. One step at a time." The boy took a deep breath and looked at the path ahead. The city stretched out before him, full of endless possibilities. The road might not be easy, and there might be challenges he didn't expect, but he knew now that he was no longer trapped by the weight of his past. He was free to create his own future. The boy stood up from the bench, ready to take that first step. His journey was only just beginning, but for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was walking alone. With the maid by his side, he felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. They both walked forward, side by side, toward an unknown future. But for the first time, the boy wasn't afraid of the unknown. He was ready to meet it head-on, because he knew that no matter what came next, he had the power to shape his own story. And as they walked, the boy and the maid had walked through the city for what felt like hours, each step further from the life he had once known. The weight of his father's legacy no longer pressed down on him, but the uncertainty of the future still lingered in his mind. Every corner they turned felt like a new beginning, yet he could not help but wonder what would happen next. He had never been on his own before, never had the freedom to make choices for himself. But as he walked beside the maid, he realized something. He was no longer afraid. The fear he had carried for so long had started to fade. The maid, who had shown him kindness when he was at his lowest, was still by his side. And in her presence, he found a strength he never knew he had. "I don't know where we're going," the boy admitted, his voice quiet. "But I don't think it matters anymore." The maid smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. "It's not about the destination," she said gently. "It's about the journey, about taking each step and trusting that you'll end up where you need to be." The boy looked at her, surprised by the simplicity of her words. It was a truth he had never considered before. For so long, he had focused on the end result, on what he was supposed to be, on what was expected of him. But now, for the first time, he realized that the journey itself was just as important as the destination. They continued walking, not with a clear plan, but with a sense of purpose. The boy didn't need to have everything figured out. He didn't need to know where he was going. He just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. They reached a quiet park as dusk began to settle over the city. The boy sat on a bench, looking out at the glowing lights in the distance. The noise of the city seemed so far away now, replaced by the soft rustle of the leaves in the breeze. It was peaceful. It was peaceful in a way he had never experienced before. He had spent so many years running from himself, trying to be someone he wasn't, trying to live up to expectations that were never his own. But now, in this quiet moment, he felt like he was finally home. Not in the mansion, not in the world his father had created, but in his own heart. The maid sat next to him, her presence comforting, yet not demanding. She didn't need him to say anything. She simply shared the moment with him. "What now?" the boy asked, his voice filled with a quiet wonder. "Now, we live," the maid said with a soft smile. "You've already taken the hardest step. The rest is just living, one day at a time." The boy nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within him. He had already made the choice to walk away from the life he had been born into, and that was enough. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a gift. As the night grew darker, the boy realized that he was no longer carrying the weight of his past. The shackles of his father's expectations had fallen away, and he could finally breathe. He could finally live for himself. And that was the greatest freedom he could have ever imagined. The road ahead would not always be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But now, he had the strength to face them. He had the power to shape his own future, to make his own choices, and to create a life that was truly his own. He looked at the maid, grateful for everything she had done for him. She had been his guide, his anchor, and now, she was his friend. "Thank you," the boy said quietly, his voice full of gratitude, "for helping me find myself." The maid smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "You found yourself," she said. "I just helped you see it." The boy took a deep breath, letting the night air fill his lungs. He wasn't the same person he had been when he walked out of the mansion. He was stronger, freer, and more alive than ever before. And with the maid by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to live it on his own terms.